This morning, my question: when we say civil rights movement today, what do we mean? Plus, the Arkansas official who's using ignorance as a political weapon. And the housing project no one should have to call home. But first, with revolution in the streets, another diplomatic challenge for President Obama. Good morning, I'm Joy Reid in for Melissa Harris Perry. We have breaking news this morning that's still developing. Right now, it's news coming from Ukraine, and we're going to bring you the latest developments. But also, I want to be sure to put this story into a broader context. So we're going to begin with the week that was for Russian President Vladimir Putin. The focus was supposed to be on the Sochi Olympics, as Mr. Putin had high hopes for the Winter Games, including the Russian men's hockey team, representing the country's national sport and a jewel in Russia's sports crown. However, they lost 3-1 against Finland on Wednesday. In spite of that loss, it was Putin's hope that the world's focus would remain on the notion that Russia was back and resurgent, making the most of its turn in the international spotlight. But that hope would not be realized. Because while Putin was dealing with the Olympics in his front yard, in his backyard he was facing revolution in the streets. It all began back in November when Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych abandoned a trade deal with the European Union in favor of closer economic ties with Russia. In fact, it was Russia that threatened trade sanctions against Ukraine if that country accepted the EU deal. Russia then froze aid to Ukraine while pushing leaders there to pass anti-protest laws. Putin may have thought that a strong-arm approach would work to repress Ukrainians, but they would prove him wrong. Ukrainians continue to take to the streets, and they succeeded in having the anti-protest laws repealed and causing the prime minister and his cabinet to resign. After months of protests and sporadic violence, matters escalated on Tuesday between protesters and police, and at least 25 people were killed and more than 200 wounded. To Putin's chagrin, the images captivating the world didn't come out of Sochi, they came out of Ukraine. Violence erupted again on Thursday between anti-government protesters and security forces in Kiev, just hours after a truce was declared. By Friday morning, the Ukrainian Health Ministry raised the official death toll for this week to at least 77, along with 577 injured. Though Russia is knee-deep in the history that led to the violence in Ukraine, the impact reaches far beyond Russia, right into the office of President Obama as the leader of the world's sole superpower. On Tuesday, Vice President Joe Biden called on Ukrainian President Yanukovych to express his grave concern over the protests and urged him to pull back government forces and exercise maximum restraint. That wasn't enough for some critics of the administration, including Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who wanted to see specific action from the president himself. Rubio released a statement on Wednesday that said, I urge the Obama administration to use every diplomatic means at its disposal, including sanctions, to bring accountability to those involved in acts of violence throughout Ukraine. Ukraine's future lies in Europe, not in Vladimir Putin's Russia. On Wednesday, during his trip to Mexico, President Obama made it very clear who he held responsible for what was going on inside the Ukraine.
We hold the Ukrainian government primarily responsible for making sure that it is dealing with peaceful protesters in an appropriate way, that the Ukrainian people are able to assemble and speak freely about their interests without fear of repression. We'll be monitoring very carefully the situation, recognizing that along with our European partners and the international community, there will be consequences if people step over the line.
Once again, President Obama is facing a revolution that the U.S. has a vested interest in. To understand what's going on, we have to go back for a minute to the Orange Revolution and this man, Viktor Yushchenko. He's the pro-Western politician who survived a poisoning attempt in 2004 and led pro-democracy crowds in mass demonstrations that resulted in reversing an election result and forced out Viktor Yanukovych, a move that many saw as a break from Moscow's manipulation. Putin at the time accused the U.S. and Europe of interfering in Ukraine's domestic politics. That helps explain some of the debate over the current crisis in Ukraine. Yesterday, an agreement was finally reached to end the deadly clashes. Ukrainian President Yanukovych agreed to early elections and a return to the country's 2004 constitution. He also ceded some of his own power. For the time being, it appeared that all-out civil war had been avoided. But just this morning, a new twist. A defiant President Yanukovych spoke out on television to denounce what he's calling a coup d'etat and insisted that he will sign nothing with the opposition, who he is calling gangsters, who are, quote, terrorizing the country. I want to bring in NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, who's joining me now by phone from Kiev, Ukraine. So, Richard, what's the scene on the ground there now?
I am just off of the main square, and this entire area in central Kiev has been taken over by demonstrators. They are now in control of large parts, if not all, of the Ukrainian capital. They are running parliament. They have taken control of the presidential offices. The president, Yanukovych, who gave that televised speech, is no longer here. He is on the run. It is unclear how much authority he still has in this country. Parliament has been passing law after law. Normally, these laws would have to be approved by Yanukovych. Yanukovych says he will not approve these laws, but Parliament is going ahead, acting on its own authority. And it seems that we are witnessing something of a coup by the legislative branch, taking control of this country on the side of the demonstrators and pushing aside the executive branch, which President Yanukovych still claims to control, although he doesn't have a great deal of authority anymore here in the capital. If he arrived here, I have almost no doubt that he would be grabbed and arrested by demonstrators. There are no government security forces in evidence. Protesters are wandering around freely across the city, and in many cases, the government forces that were here are now cooperating with them.
So then, given the fact that you're saying that Yanukovych is essentially, as you said, on the run, and it's not clear how much authority he has, who is actually in control of the country right now?
The parliament is emerging as the de facto leadership right here, and parliament has been meeting all day, passing law after law to release some political prisoners, to pass sanctions in favor of to pass laws, I should say, in favor of the demonstrators. It seems that they are running things politically. On the ground, it's the demonstrators themselves who have been at this movement for the last 3 months and have therefore organized themselves into different committees. There are defense committees, there are supply committees, and those committees are the ones that are organizing traffic, setting up checkpoints, and it has been very peaceful and organized, I must say. There have not been violence on the street.
So, Richard,
nor have we seen any looting.
Okay, so, Richard, we've also heard conflicting reports this morning about Ukraine's former prime minister and whether or not she's actually been released from prison. So tell us the significance of her role there and what her status is as you know it.
The former prime minister, that was one of the things that the parliament was voting on today, was to secure her release. She is expected in this area at any moment, really. There have been conflicting reports as to whether she has been actually released from jail or is on her way or is about to be released from prison. But she is expected to be released or has already been released and is expected by the protesters to come and greet them here. And everyone who I've spoken to thinks that when she arrives, there will be an enormous celebration as yet another symbol that the Ukrainian revolution, if you ask people here, has already won and just needs to finalize its control of the country by removing Yanukovych. That's the way it's seen here. So far, the armed forces in Ukraine have not intervened. In fact, the army has said that it will not react violently and put itself in the middle of this crisis.
All right, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, thank you, live in Kiev. We appreciate it. The situation in Ukraine still leaves much for world leaders to sort through. And Friday afternoon, President Obama got on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin and spoke with him for about an hour regarding the peace deal. And for more on that and the role the U.S. and its allies will play in the still unfolding situation, I'm joined by Mark Quarterman, the research director at the Enough Project, which works to end genocide and crimes against humanity. Ian Bremmer, president of the Eurasia Group, which is a leading global risk research and consulting firm. Michael Singh, the managing director of the Washington Institute, and former senior director for Middle East Affairs at the National Security Council, and also Adrian Karatnycky, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's program on transatlantic relations. So thanks to you all. So let's unpack. I mean, these developments really are happening literally minute by minute. Can you unpack for us sort of the who wins, who loses thing, right? You've got Vladimir Putin's man, essentially, in Ukraine, whereabouts unknown, status unknown. What does that mean for Russia and for Ukraine?
Let me pull it back to make one clarification. The Parliament is acting within the context of the Constitution. The Parliament is acting with veto-proof constitutional majorities. There have been 380 deputies that approved the reworking of the Constitution. That's more than 3/4 of the Parliament, and they're voting by 2/3 plus one. That means that Mr. Yanukovych's base has defected in the Parliament, and they represent the vast economic interests in the country. They represent people who have served in the security structures. They have elected a new Minister of the Interior. He has taken over, and there is now a command structure being formed. The leaders of the security service in Kiev and the militia, who a few days ago were killing the demonstrators, have pledged loyalty to this chain of command and to work with the civic civil defense units. So taken together, the important thing is that there is some constitutional coherence. Mr. Yanukovych now, even though he still has the title of president, and from the legal and formal point of view, until impeachment proceedings and until he would be removed or resign voluntarily, he has some claim to authority, has no command and control over vast resources of the military, of the security, but he still has a residual base of support, and he could use regional military units in the east to fight back and to create mayhem. And Russia potentially could respond, and that is another danger that diplomacy has to avert, to the call of a president to come to his defense, which would mean de facto an invasion, because the president has lost legitimacy, he has lost support, and he is on the verge of being not just impeached but removed from office.
Okay, I want to get to more about this language of whether the coup language that's being used is accurate, but I'm going to work everyone in after the break. We have a lot more to get into on this, and when we come back, I want to hear more from the White House.